All right. I guess I'm the closer for today. So my name is Jerrod Davis, and I'm with the Washington State Department of Health, and I'm the director for the Office of Shellfish and Water Protection. So in my office, we are in charge of making sure our shellfish are safe to eat here in the state. Also, swimming beaches, making sure that they're safe for folks to swim in, and then also on-site sewage systems, the small septic tank systems, and the larger on-site sewage systems. The smaller wastewater infrastructure in our state, we're in charge of. So one of the things I wanted to mention, the governor's speech was pretty inspirational, but he mentioned public health several times in his speech today. When he didn't talk about it much, but he talked a little bit about the shellfish industry and some of the impacts of the shellfish industry, not just to the industry, but that also means tribal harvest, recreational harvest. I mean, it's a huge way of life. I don't know how many of you are recreational shellfish harvesters in the room, but man, I sure love it. Anyway, and also he talked a little bit about going to the Yakima Valley and dealing with some of the irrigation situation there. And then also the city of Anacortes and the drinking water impacts. That community has really stepped up and spent twice as much money as they should have spent or they could have spent to deal with their infrastructure and making sure that it's not going to be impacted by sea level rise and also from the sediments coming down the river. So that's an example, and he mentioned that as well. And then also the wildfires and the floods, and I'll talk a little bit about that as well. I think, coming to a conference like this just makes me realize that I feel like I have a very hard job already, and it's really, it's so important for us to work with researchers to figure out ways for us at public health to just make better decisions about what we do, because we're very much shoot from the hip. We take environmental data, we use the data we have, and we make decisions in the moment. And that's just what we do in public health, and that's true in local public health as well. And a lot of times it's nose to the grindstone, and we don't really think about how we should be smarter about doing the research, getting better tools for us to make better decisions. And I just think that it's just evident to me that we just have a lot more work to do when it comes to that. But when we ask about what's climate variability? How is it going to impact us in public health? It almost seems overwhelming, but really at the same time, it's going to impact just some basic aspects of our way of life when it comes to the basics of public health: food, water, air. I mean, that's pretty simple, but that's clearly going to be impacting the way we respond to it for sure. So some of the threats to our food supply, I'll talk a little bit about shellfish because I'm from the shellfish program. And we're definitely seeing some new toxins on the scene, and they're definitely impacting shellfish harvest. There are others at this conference have talked a lot about water shortages and temperatures that can impact agriculture and aquaculture. I mean, you can just look at the California drought as one example. It's just devastating what's happening down there. It's the third most severe drought of all time. And 50% of the fruits, nuts, and vegetables in this country are grown there. I mean, that's a food security, food issue for Washington State, and that's a significant challenge. Ocean acidification is also something that's getting a lot of energy. We're putting some energy into it here in Washington, and hopefully maybe some things will come out of the next legislative session. But we're definitely, again, it impacts not just to our shellfish industry, but our traditional tribal harvest and recreational shellfish harvest. And also there is a public health link there that hopefully I can make a better link to that today around the toxic algae blooms that get produced. More acidic conditions can kind of increase or exacerbate that. And so that's definitely could be an increase to public health from a shellfish harvest perspective. So here's just a slide. And it's just the gist of this is that, yes, harmful algal blooms are increasing in the United States and around the world. I guess the map of the United States is showing in the United States from early 1992 to beyond, and we're definitely seeing more algae blooms occurring around the country. There's also, these are the number of episodes up here over time, and then also there's some data here from China as well. So it's pretty easy to look at the literature to see that we're definitely seeing more blooms. I mean, if you look at Department of Health, we have quite a big data set. We've been monitoring for paralytic shellfish poisoning since the 1950s. So we have a lot of data, and I think we have some researchers, and I think one of them's in the room, Stephanie Moore from NOAA up there, but there are some researchers that we're working with to try to mine this data to help us determine, what the changes have been over the last 50 or 60 years, and then how can we kind of predict the future and project how we can maybe better respond to some of these protecting public health. And so now we're also hopefully reaching out to the Climate Impacts Group and the School of Public Health to do some more things around that as well. Being conscious of time, one of the things that we have done, and with Stephanie's help, well, she really did it. I think we didn't really help that much. We gave her the data. But she looked at the 5 most toxic events, the most recent toxic events, and started to get an idea and ask questions about what was the weather and the environmental parameters, what did they look like during those events, and started to look at this 20-day period before a large toxic event, and so what were the environmental parameters, and looking at wind and air temperature, all these factors that we know impact harmful algal blooms, surface temperature and stream flow, and start to look at what is kind of leading up to these very toxic events. And what the phrase that has been coined is the window of opportunity that allows these toxic events to occur. And we have seen kind of an increase. If you look at the 70s, the 80s, and the 90s, there are an increased number of this window of opportunity. There's more opportunities for more toxic events to occur in the future, or that's happened over time. And so the whole idea here was to kind of look at the data we have and what's been happening. Can we get a tool that would help us predict or forecast where we think we might have hot spots in Puget Sound and the coast when it comes to shellfish toxicity? So that's the goal. It's not quite finished yet, but that is the goal. We need more funding, of course. But they were able to look at some greenhouse gas emission scenarios and start to project as well based on the data we had, and start to look out what would these kind of window of opportunities look like, or what would the seasons look like if you project out in the future. And as you could see from this graph, in the June, July, August, September, October period, we're expecting to see, in the 2020s, 40s, and 80s, we're expecting to see kind of earlier blooms to occur earlier in the season, and also longer blooms later in the season, and then also an increase in the toxicity as well when in those areas. So I think that's just, from a public health professional perspective, it just makes our job a little bit harder, because we're going to have to do that much more monitoring, and also there's just that risk to human health. It's been amazing that we have had so few illnesses when it comes to paralytic shellfish poisoning, and it's definitely deadly. But we haven't had very many illnesses, and I think part of it is just we've had a really good outreach campaign, and also we've been doing a lot of monitoring and getting that word out to the public. But I just think that's definitely going to be harder in the future. But this is more just an example of how we have some data. We want to work with researchers to figure out how we can get some better tools for the future. Another challenging bug for us, naturally occurring bacteria, is Vibrio bacteria. And this causes illnesses every summer. We've had about 60 illnesses so far this summer. And that's 60 confirmed kind of reported illnesses. We know there's a lot more out there, but that's how many we actually know of. And it's an elusive bug. It's been challenging to deal with. We're working really a lot with the shellfish industry to make sure that the shellfish product is cool, because this bug can rapidly, it's very sensitive to temperature, and it can increase significantly in a short period of time at some of the temperatures we get in our waters here in Puget Sound in particular. So this is another area that we hope to work with Climate Impacts Group and the School of Public Health to just try to get smarter about what we know about the bug, and also, again, if we can get into these way of looking at the data we have and start to look at predictive forecasts of where we think we're going to have issues, we can be more proactive at maybe shutting down the harvest, which would result in fewer illnesses. So that's really what we're trying to get to, is reduce illnesses. I think this is Amy Snover's slide. It's beautiful, but it's clearly there's going to be some threats to our water supply from an irrigation, food perspective, and then also for drinking water supplies. It looks like the Puget Sound water suppliers, and I mean, that's the three big ones here, like Everett, Seattle, Tacoma, are doing pretty good. They've had some good forethought and planning that they'll fare pretty well out several decades. But I still think the impacts on groundwater are uncertain, and there's definitely communities today that are having serious water issues for sure. I just wanted to mention a little bit about air quality. And in particular, I think you all are a pretty well-informed audience, but this graph just shows a 3-year running average of the acres burned in our state, which is the green line, and then the number of fires, which is the blue line. So, and it's from 1980 to just this year. So the number of fires seem like that might be, the trend is decreasing slightly, but the number of acres burned are definitely increasing over time. And I think the projections it's pretty obvious looking at some of the projections and some of the climate impacts group work that it's going to be increasing in the future. But one of the things where the rubber meets the road is how local health and the state Department of Health responds to forest fires. During this most recent event here in Okanagan County, we were working with public water systems. We've had to issue several boil water advisories because when you have fires, you lose power, and then when you lose power, pumps are down, water systems are down, wastewater systems are down, and so those are just some real basic aspects of forest fires. And then also livestock perished and having to dispose of that. Just some real basic public health stuff. We respond to it now. If we're going to see if climate variability is going to impact and make more of these events, it's just going to be public health is going to have to respond more frequently. And then also in 2012, there was an event in several counties, including Okanagan, and then we were able to compare the number of additional hospitalizations that occurred to breathing problems for that year to the previous year, and also school absences. So there wasn't not a lot of data in my talk, but that's why I feel like we're a little behind at the Department of Health. That we really want to work with researchers and start to find some compelling stories. I think that's my next slide. I'll just go to this one here since I'm kind of out of time. One of the things we did do is working, like Brendan mentioned, in Oregon. We're working with our local public health departments, which there's 35 local health jurisdictions, to try to get an idea of what their perceptions are. When we asked them this question, how would you rate your concern of climate change? You can see that the darker colors are the higher concern, to the lighter color is either don't know or a low concern. So we have some educating to do. This is kind of how our local health jurisdictions compare to some of the folks nationally that was similar to some of the stuff that Brendan mentioned. And it looks like our local health jurisdictions don't think that it's quite the problem that a lot of folks do across the country, is the gist of that. But here's an interesting point. Because I sometimes go out to our local health departments and talk about climate change, and that's not real popular in some parts of the state. But when I talk about these topics, heat, food safety, sea level rise, especially when I'm on the west side of the mountains, septic systems, just vector-borne, zoonotic diseases, water availability, water resources, wildfires, that's what resonates with people. And then they start to think of, yes, well, I am planning for that. Like, no, I'm definitely against climate change, but I am doing something about wildfires, or I'm doing something about these topics. And so I think there are some plans to incorporate these into their work and their planning, but it's just kind of hard to start to put that climate change lens on that because you kind of lose more folks when we do that. So we're struggling at Department of Health to figure out how to communicate and to partner with folks in order to really prepare for the future. So we just need to get creative, it sounds like. So our next steps, raise awareness. I think the one thing here, the bullet, is partner with academia and researchers. I think that we just have a lot more opportunities to do that. So, and I'm already seeing some new opportunities in the recent months, which has been great. So I think that's all the time we have for. Yeah.